The desert highway stretched endlessly under the blazing afternoon sun, heat waves shimmering off the asphalt like liquid mercury. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he drove his weathered roadside assistance truck toward the coordinates that had crackled through his radio 20 minutes earlier. Single motorcycle accident, mile marker 247, rider down. Another routine call in what had been a long week of routine calls. His phone buzzed on the dashboard, displaying a text from his 80-year-old daughter Emma. "Dad, when will you be home? We're supposed to practice my spelling words tonight." Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. He had promised her they would work on her homework together, one of the few constants he tried to maintain in their modest life since becoming a single father 3 years ago. The smell of burning rubber and hot metal hit him before he saw the wreckage. Around the bend, scattered across both lanes, lay the twisted remains of what had once been a convoy of motorcycles. Not a single accident, Marcus realized with growing alarm, but something much worse. Multiple bikes lay on their sides, chrome and leather scattered across the scorching pavement. Bodies in black leather were strewn about like broken dolls. Marcus pulled his truck to the shoulder and grabbed his basic first aid kit, his mind automatically shifting into a different mode. The training never really left, even after all these years of changing tires and jumping dead batteries. He approached the closest figure, a massive man with graying hair and intricate tattoos covering his arms. Blood pooled beneath his head, but Marcus could see the steady rise and fall of his chest. As he knelt beside the injured rider, Marcus noticed the distinctive patches on the man's leather vest. Hell's Angels. The realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the desert wind. These weren't weekend warriors out for a scenic ride. These were serious people, and from the looks of the accident scene, someone was going to be very angry about what had happened here. Marcus pressed 2 fingers against the man's neck, feeling for a pulse. Strong and steady, but the head wound needed immediate attention. He quickly assessed the unconscious rider's breathing pattern and pupil response with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. The man would live, but others might not be so fortunate. A groan from across the highway caught his attention. A younger biker, maybe in his 20s, was trying to sit up despite what appeared to be a severely broken leg. The bone protruded at an unnatural angle through torn denim, blood seeping steadily onto the hot asphalt. Marcus moved quickly, his hands instinctively reaching for supplies that weren't there. "Stay down, son," Marcus called out, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "Don't try to move that leg." The young man's eyes widened at the command, something in Marcus's tone making him freeze mid-motion. Moving systematically from victim to victim, Marcus began a rapid triage assessment that would have impressed any emergency room physician. He checked airways, controlled bleeding with strips torn from his own shirt, and positioned the unconscious riders to prevent aspiration. His movements were fluid and confident, each decision made with split-second precision. The sound of approaching sirens finally pierced the desert silence, but Marcus barely noticed. He was crouched over the most critically injured rider, a man whose shallow, irregular breathing suggested internal trauma. The biker's skin had taken on a grayish pallor that Marcus recognized immediately. This one was slipping away fast, and the ambulance might not arrive in time. Marcus placed his hands on the man's chest, feeling for the telltale signs of a pneumothorax. The memories came flooding back unbidden. Afghanistan, 2018. The convoy that never made it back. Sarah's voice on the radio, calm and professional even as her medical unit came under fire. She had talked him through emergency field procedures that saved 3 lives that day, her guidance steady and sure until the line went silent forever. He pushed the painful memories aside and focused on the present. The injured biker's breathing was becoming more labored, his lips taking on a bluish tinge. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible for a roadside assistance mechanic to make. He positioned his hands carefully and began a precise chest compression technique designed to reinflate a collapsed lung. The first paramedic on scene rushed over, medical bag in hand, then stopped short when he saw what Marcus was doing. "That's a pretty advanced procedure for a civilian," the paramedic said, kneeling beside them. Marcus didn't look up from his patient. "Former Army medic," he said simply, continuing the rhythmic compressions. "Lost my certification when I left the service, but some things you never forget." The injured man's breathing began to improve almost immediately, color returning to his face. The paramedic watched in amazement as Marcus seamlessly transitioned care, providing a rapid but thorough report on each victim's condition and the treatment already administered. His assessment was more complete than most emergency room physicians could have managed under these conditions. As additional ambulances arrived and the scene became organized chaos, Marcus quietly stepped back into the shadows. His work here was done, and he needed to get home to Emma. The hospital parking lot buzzed with activity as Marcus arrived an hour later, still wearing his grease-stained work shirt. He had only come to check on the most critical patient, the one whose life had hung by a thread on that desert highway. The charge nurse recognized him immediately from the paramedic's description and led him toward the intensive care unit. "He's stable now, thanks to you," she said softly as they walked down the sterile corridor. "The doctor said that field procedure you performed bought him the time he needed. Without it, he wouldn't have made it to surgery." Marcus nodded quietly, uncomfortable with the praise. He had done what anyone with training would have done, nothing more. Through the ICU window, Marcus could see the patient surrounded by tubes and monitors, his massive frame looking smaller against the white hospital sheets. A woman with tears in her eyes sat beside the bed, holding the unconscious man's hand. Her son, maybe 16 years old, stood behind her chair with the same distinctive features as the patient. The boy noticed Marcus watching and stepped into the hallway. "Are you the guy who saved my dad?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. The paramedic said some mechanic knew exactly what to do when his lung collapsed. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he got whenever someone thanked him for things he wished he had never learned how to do. "I just helped until the real professionals arrived," Marcus replied gently. "Your father's a fighter. He's going to be fine." The boy's eyes filled with tears as he gripped Marcus's oil-stained hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for bringing him back to us." As Marcus drove home through the darkening desert, his phone buzzed with another text from Emma. "Dad, I made us mac and cheese for dinner. It might be a little burned but I tried my best." He smiled, pressing the accelerator slightly harder. Some things were more important than recognition. The small trailer park where they lived looked tired under the fading sunset, but Emma had hung string lights around their modest mobile home that made it feel like magic. She burst through the screen door before Marcus had even turned off his truck, her dark pigtails bouncing as she ran to greet him. The sight of her bright smile instantly washed away the weight of the day's events. "Daddy, you're really late," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I was worried something bad happened." Marcus knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just a long day at work, sweetheart. But I'm here now, and that's what matters." Inside their small home, the kitchen table was set with mismatched plates and plastic cups filled with water. The mac and cheese was indeed slightly burned around the edges, but Marcus ate every bite with genuine appreciation while Emma chattered about her day at school. She had scored perfectly on her math test and helped a new student find the cafeteria during lunch. As they worked through her spelling words together, Emma suddenly looked up from her homework. "Dad, why do you always help people even when they can't help you back?" The question caught Marcus off guard, spoken with the innocent wisdom that children sometimes possess. He thought about the injured bikers, about all the people he had helped over the years who never knew his name. "Because that's what good people do, Emma. We help others not because we expect something in return, but because it's the right thing to do." Emma nodded solemnly, as if filing away this piece of adult wisdom for future use. Around the world tonight, there are fathers just like us, sharing dinner and homework time, teaching their children about kindness and courage. The next morning brought the familiar rhythm of Marcus's work routine. He dropped Emma at school with a packed lunch and a kiss on her forehead, then drove to the small garage where he worked alongside two other mechanics. The building was old and weathered, but it served the community's needs for honest automotive repair at fair prices. Marcus was elbow-deep in the engine compartment of a broken-down pickup truck when the rumble of multiple motorcycles filled the air outside. The sound grew louder and more distinct until it seemed to surround the entire building. Through the grimy garage windows, Marcus could see chrome and black leather as a convoy of Harleys pulled into the parking lot. His co-workers, Jerry and Miguel, exchanged nervous glances. "That's a lot of bikes," Jerry muttered, wiping his hands on an oil rag. "They look like they're here for business." Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he recognized several of the riders from yesterday's accident scene. The massive man he had treated for the head injury was among them, now wearing a bandage but moving under his own power. The shop fell silent except for the cooling tick of motorcycle engines as 8 leather-clad figures entered through the bay doors. They moved with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to being taken seriously, their presence filling the small space with an almost electric tension. Marcus straightened slowly, unsure whether they had come to thank him or blame him for something that had gone wrong. The injured man stepped forward, his eyes scanning the garage until they locked onto Marcus. "You're the mechanic who was at the accident yesterday," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We need to talk." Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls, maintaining steady eye contact despite the intimidating presence filling his workplace. "I'm Marcus Chen. I was there, yes." The man nodded slowly, then did something completely unexpected. He extended his hand in greeting, his weathered face breaking into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Name's Tank," he said as Marcus cautiously shook his hand. "These are my brothers. We came here because we owe you a debt that can never be repaid." The words hung in the air like smoke, confusing Marcus even more than the initial confrontation had. Jerry and Miguel remained frozen by their workbenches, unsure whether to run or stay. Tank gestured toward a younger biker who stepped forward, the same teenager Marcus had seen at the hospital. "This is my son, Danny. The man you saved on that highway, the one who was dying when you got there, that was my boy." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place, understanding dawning in his eyes as he looked between father and son. "The doctor said Danny's lung had completely collapsed," Tank continued, his voice thick with emotion. "They said without that procedure you did, without keeping him breathing until the paramedics arrived, he would have died on that road. You gave me back my son, Marcus. You gave him back his future." Marcus shifted uncomfortably under the weight of their gratitude, the same way he always did when people thanked him for doing what felt like basic human decency. "Anyone would have done the same thing," he said quietly. "I just happen to have some medical training from my time in the service." From somewhere across the world right now, there's probably another father getting the call that his child has been in an accident, Tank said solemnly. "Most of those fathers won't be as lucky as I was yesterday." Tank reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on Marcus's workbench with deliberate ceremony. "There's $10,000 in there," he said simply. "It's not enough, but it's a start. We also want to offer you a job. My organization has connections, legitimate businesses that could use someone with your skills and character." Marcus stared at the envelope without touching it, his mind racing. $10,000 would solve so many problems. Emma's school supplies, the overdue rent, the truck that needed new brakes. But something deep inside him, the same instinct that had made him step away from recognition at the hospital, made him shake his head slowly. "I appreciate the offer, Tank, I really do. But I can't accept this." Marcus pushed the envelope gently back across the workbench. "What I did yesterday wasn't about money or favors. Your son needed help, and I was able to provide it. That's where it ends." Tank studied Marcus with the intensity of someone who had spent decades reading people, searching for angles or hidden agendas. What he found instead was something rarer than he had expected. Genuine humility. A man who truly believed that saving a life was simply what decent people did, without expectation of reward or recognition. "You really mean that, don't you?" Tank asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "You honestly don't want anything from us?" Marcus nodded, glancing at the clock on the wall. I need to get back to work. My boss doesn't pay me to stand around talking, and I've got a daughter to pick up from school in a few hours. The bikers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that Marcus didn't fully understand. Tank picked up the envelope and tucked it back into his jacket, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. We'll be in touch, he said finally. That evening, Tank sat in his study surrounded by printouts and photographs, the results of a thorough background investigation that had taken his contacts less than 4 hours to complete. The story they told was both heartbreaking and inspiring, painting a picture of a man who had sacrificed everything for duty and family. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, decorated Army medic. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 for valor under fire. His wife Sarah had been a field surgeon killed in a Taliban rocket attack while treating wounded civilians. Marcus had left the military immediately after her death to raise their infant daughter alone, abandoning a promising career to become a single father. The financial records were equally revealing. Marcus worked 60 hours a week between the garage and a weekend job at a truck stop, barely making enough to cover rent on their small trailer and Emma's basic needs. He had sold Sarah's engagement ring last year to pay for Emma's school clothes, a detail that made Tank close his eyes and take a deep breath. There were medical bills from when Emma had pneumonia 2 winters ago, still being paid off in $20 monthly installments. Marcus had donated blood plasma twice a week for 6 months to cover the costs, a sacrifice that spoke to depths of love and determination that Tank recognized but rarely encountered. The most telling detail was a letter from Emma's school, praising Marcus for his volunteer work helping other single parents navigate military widow benefits. Even in his own struggles, he found time to help others who faced similar challenges. Tank set down the papers and stared out his window at the desert landscape. This man, this quiet mechanic who had saved his son's life, was exactly the kind of person the world needed more of. Someone who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. Tank picked up his phone and began making calls. 3 days later, the rumble of motorcycles returned to Marcus's garage, but this time the sound was different. Instead of the intimidating convoy from before, bikes arrived individually throughout the morning, each rider bringing a motorcycle that supposedly needed repair work. Marcus found himself busier than he had been in months. The first customer was Danny, Tank's son, wheeling in a pristine Harley that clearly ran perfectly. She's been making a weird noise, he explained with a straight face. Could you take a look and maybe give her a full tune-up? Marcus raised an eyebrow at the immaculate machine but nodded professionally. Sure thing. Might take a few days though. By noon, Marcus had accepted work on 6 motorcycles, all from members of Tank's crew, all paying premium rates for routine maintenance. Jerry and Miguel watched in amazement as their usually quiet shop transformed into the busiest motorcycle service center in 3 counties. The bikers were polite, patient, and paid in cash without questioning any estimates. Tank arrived last, pushing a vintage shovelhead that had clearly seen better decades. This old girl belonged to my father, he told Marcus, running his hand along the worn tank. She hasn't run in years, but I'd like to get her roadworthy again. Take your time, do it right. Money's no object when it comes to family history. As Marcus examined the vintage motorcycle, he began to understand what was happening. These men weren't customers seeking repairs. They were creating work for him, providing income disguised as legitimate business. The realization should have made him angry, but instead he felt something unexpected. Around the world tonight, there are communities coming together to support those who have given so much, people recognizing that sometimes the strongest among us need help too. By the end of the week, Marcus could no longer pretend he didn't understand. When Tank arrived to check on his father's shovelhead, Marcus was waiting for him with oil-stained hands and eyes that held both gratitude and stubborn pride. The vintage bike sat fully restored behind him, purring like a contented cat. You didn't need any of this work done, did you? Marcus asked quietly, gesturing toward the motorcycles that filled his shop. Tank met his gaze without flinching, his weathered face showing no trace of apology. No, we didn't. But you needed the work, and we needed a way to help someone who wouldn't let us help him any other way. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion he had been holding back for years. Tank, I can't accept charity. I've got my pride, my daughter to think about. I need to provide for her myself. Tank stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder with surprising gentleness. This isn't charity, brother. This is family taking care of family. You saved my son's life, and that makes you part of something bigger than money or pride. Tank's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You think I don't know what it's like to struggle alone? You think I don't understand what it means to sacrifice everything for the people you love? The two men stood in the sudden silence of the garage, surrounded by the mechanical symphony of rebuilt engines and restored dreams. Marcus felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed since Sarah's funeral, threatening to break free. Tank continued speaking, his words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. When someone saves your child, when they give you back your future, you don't walk away from that person. You become their brother for life. Marcus felt the walls he had built around his heart over the past 3 years begin to crumble. For so long he had carried everything alone, believing that accepting help would somehow diminish his worth as a father and a man. But looking into Tank's eyes, he saw something that changed everything. He saw the same fierce protectiveness he felt for Emma reflected back at him. All right, Marcus said finally, his voice barely steady. All right, brother. Tank's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind reserved for moments of true connection between people who understood loss and love in equal measure. The handshake they shared sealed something deeper than friendship, a bond forged in crisis and strengthened by mutual respect. 6 months later, Marcus's shop had become the unofficial headquarters for motorcycle maintenance in 3 counties. Emma had her own small desk in the corner where she did homework after school, chattering happily with the steady stream of leather-clad customers who treated her like a beloved niece. Her college fund, mysteriously established by an anonymous donor, would ensure her future was secure. Marcus had found his calling as the unofficial medic for the extended motorcycle community, keeping a well-stocked first aid station in his shop and providing emergency care for riders across the region. Word spread through the Brotherhood about the quiet mechanic who could save lives, and Marcus discovered that healing others helped heal the wounds in his own heart. On warm evenings, Emma would ride behind her father on Tank's restored shovelhead, her arms wrapped tight around his waist as they cruised the desert highways. She had gained not just financial security but an extended family of honorary uncles who would protect her with their lives. Marcus Chen had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from allowing others to stand beside you. In saving Danny's life, he had discovered that brotherhood isn't earned through blood, but through the willingness to risk everything for someone else's tomorrow.